Lenora Ashby had built a hotel from the ground up, but she never let anyone know it. That was the part people always got wrong about her. They assumed that someone who had quietly turned a single 3-story property in Banff into a collection of boutique mountain retreats across Western Canada must walk a certain way, chin up, voice carrying, the kind of woman who corrected servers on wine temperatures. Lenora wasn't like that. She wore plain clothes. She drove herself. She knew the name of every housekeeper at every property she owned, and when she visited, she always came through the back. She was 61 years old, and she had learned, over those 61 years, that the most reliable way to understand a person was to be invisible around them. Her son Callum had not yet learned this. He was 32, good-looking in the easy way his father had been, with brown eyes and a habit of running a hand through his hair when he was nervous. He worked in commercial real estate and did it well. He was thoughtful with people he knew, generous when he noticed a need. He was, as far as Lenora could tell, exactly the kind of man she had hoped he would become. The problem wasn't Callum. The problem was Vivienne. Lenora had met Vivienne Harlow 4 times before she understood what she was seeing. The first time, she chalked the sharpness up to nerves. A young woman meeting the mother of the man she was engaged to. That was a loaded encounter. Lenora gave her that. The second time, Vivienne had been charming in a rehearsed way, complimenting the kitchen, asking careful questions about the business that felt more like research than curiosity. The third time, she'd spoken over a waiter twice and not noticed. The fourth time, Lenora watched her reduce a front desk associate at Callum's firm's holiday party to near tears over a seating error that wasn't the associate's fault, and then turn to Callum with a bright smile and say she just had high standards. Callum had nodded. That nod had stayed with Lenora for 2 months. She didn't say anything to him. She knew how that went. You said something too soon without proof, and the person you were trying to protect closed a door that could take years to reopen. She had seen it happen in other families. She had watched mothers lose their sons over poorly timed honesty. So she waited and she thought, and eventually she came up with a plan that, if she told anyone about it, they would have told her was excessive. She didn't tell anyone. It was October when the opportunity arrived. Callum had booked a long weekend at the Quarry Lake Lodge, one of Lenora's properties, though he'd told Vivienne it was simply the nicest place he could find in the area, which was true and also incomplete. He was bringing Vivienne and 2 of her friends for a fall getaway, a pre-wedding trip he'd called it, a chance for everyone to relax. Lenora called her general manager at Quarry Lake on a Tuesday. "I need a favor," she said, "and I need you not to ask too many questions." The general manager, a steady woman named Bev, who had worked for Lenora for 9 years, said, "That's never a sentence I love hearing from you. The favor is small. I need to work the weekend shift. Housekeeping, service, whatever you can fit me in." There was a pause. "Your son is coming that weekend," Bev said. "I'm aware." Another pause. "You want to be invisible. I want to see something clearly," Lenora said. "There's a difference." Bev didn't argue. She knew Lenora well enough to know that when Lenora's decided something, the energy was better spent on logistics. She pulled Lenora into the early morning housekeeping team as a float, the kind of staff member who moved between floors, assisted with turnovers, helped with room service delivery when the regular runner was stretched thin. It wasn't complicated work, but it required being places where guests were present. That was the point. Lenora arrived Friday morning before 6. She'd driven herself from Calgary, 2 hours in the dark with the mountains just beginning to show against the lightening sky. She changed in the staff room, put on the uniform, dark trousers, a gray button-up, the small logoed pin that all the service staff wore, and pulled her hair back the way she never wore it. She did not wear jewelry. She wore the reading glasses she normally avoided. She looked, in the mirror, like exactly what she was pretending to be. A practical woman in her 60s, who had been doing this kind of work for a long time. The housekeeping team lead, a young man named Ferris who had started at the lodge 6 months ago and had never met Lenora in anything other than photographs, glanced at her check-in sheet and said, "You're on the 3rd East Wing this morning. Then floater service after 11. Any questions? Find me or Claudette." "Got it," Lenora said. She went to work. The 3rd floor, East Wing, was where Callum's party was staying. She knew that. She'd asked Bev to make sure. She wasn't there to eavesdrop or search rooms. She wasn't interested in that kind of information. She was there to be present, in the peripheral way that service staff always are, in the space where people don't bother to perform, because they assume the person carrying fresh towels doesn't matter. Callum's group arrived at check-in just before noon. Lenora was on the far side of the lobby with a cart, restocking a linen closet, her back mostly to the entrance. She heard them before she saw them. Vivienne's voice first, a clear and carrying tone asking whether the suite had been confirmed as a corner unit because she'd specifically requested a corner unit. The front desk associate, Lenora could see from the corner of her eye, was a young woman named Danica who had been with the lodge for about a year. Danica smiled and pulled up the reservation. "You're in 307, Danica said. "That is our corner suite on the 3rd floor. Mountain view on 2 sides. Fireplace, the soaking tub you requested." "I can see from the floor plan that 309 is a larger corner," Vivienne said. "Is 309 available?" "309 is currently occupied," Danica said, still pleasant. "307 is the same footprint on the opposite corner. The views are actually—" "I'm not asking about the views," Vivienne said. "I'm asking whether 309 is available. It isn't, then I'd like to speak with the manager." Callum, standing just behind Vivienne, said her name quietly. She didn't look at him. Danica got the floor manager. The floor manager explained the same thing, slightly differently. Vivienne listened with her arms crossed and her chin up and eventually said, "Fine," in a tone that made clear it was not fine, and they went upstairs. Lenora folded towels and did not move until the elevator doors had closed. She thought about Danica, who had done nothing wrong, and who would carry the residue of that interaction for the rest of her shift. She went back to work. The rest of Friday was unremarkable. Lenora restocked linens, assisted with a room service delivery to the 2nd floor, ate lunch in the staff room with Ferris and 2 of the morning housekeepers, and listened to people talk about their weekends. She was conscious of how easy it was, how quickly the staff accepted her as one of them. People didn't look closely at someone who was doing the work. She had known this in theory. It was different to feel it. Saturday morning was when things changed. Lenora was on the breakfast service rotation, helping set up the dining room and run carafes of coffee to the tables. The lodge's dining room looked out over a small lake that caught the morning light in a way that, even after years of owning the property, still made her stop for a second when she walked past the windows. Callum came down early, before Vivienne and the others. He sat at a corner table with his coffee and his phone, and Lenora brought him a second pour without looking at him directly. He said, "Thank you," absently, the way people do when they're reading something. She moved away. She stood at the service station near the kitchen door and watched her son sit in the quiet of an October morning, and something in her chest went soft and complicated. He looked peaceful. He looked like a man who was trying very hard to believe that things were fine. She thought about the nod, the way he had nodded when Vivienne said she just had high standards. The others came down at 9:30. Vivienne's 2 friends, a woman named Sable who seemed pleasant and laughed easily, and a man named Theo who barely spoke, settled in quickly. Vivienne ordered a specific modification to the eggs Benedict that the server, a young man named Pierre, wrote down carefully. When the food came out, the eggs were not what Vivienne had ordered. Pierre apologized immediately and took the plate back. He returned 6 minutes later with the corrected dish. He set it down, smiled, and said he hoped it was better. Vivienne looked at the plate for a long moment. "The hollandaise is broken," she said. Pierre leaned in slightly to look. "I can take it back," he began. "This is the 2nd time," Vivienne said, not loudly, but with a particular precision that cut the ambient noise of the dining room. "I asked for something specific. Twice now it's come out wrong. What exactly is the process here? Does the kitchen not read the tickets?" Pierre kept his expression neutral. "I'm very sorry. I'll have the chef." "I don't need you to be sorry," Vivienne said. "I need the food to be correct." She looked at him then, in a way that held just slightly too long. Pierre took the plate and went back to the kitchen. Lenora, from the service station, watched Callum watch the table. He didn't say anything. He looked at his coffee cup. Sable said, "Viv, it's fine." Vivienne said, "I'm not the one who made it wrong." That was all. The conversation moved on. A new plate came out 10 minutes later, and Vivienne ate it without comment, which was apparently meant to serve as resolution. Lenora refilled the coffee carafes and thought about what she had just seen. It wasn't the complaint itself. Complaints happened, food came out wrong, that was real. It was the precision of it. The way Vivienne had chosen to correct rather than request, to instruct rather than ask. It was a small thing, and small things accumulated. She had seen this pattern before, in other contexts, in other people. It was the pattern of someone who believed that their discomfort was always someone else's fault. The moment that mattered happened on Sunday. Lenora was covering a mid-morning room service delivery. A cart with coffee, pastries, and a small arrangement of fruit for the third floor. She knocked on the door of 305, left it outside as requested, then took the empty cart toward the service corridor. The door to 307, Callum's suite, was open about 4 inches. Not unusual. Sometimes guests propped doors for air or were waiting for something. She wasn't going to 307. She was passing it. She heard Vivienne's voice first. "I'm just saying it's embarrassing." And then Callum. "It wasn't a big deal." "It is a big deal," Vivienne said. "When you let the staff treat you like that, you look weak." "I looked weak by association." "Pierre was doing his jobs," Callum said. His voice was careful. "The order was wrong. He fixed it." "Eventually," Vivienne said. "After 2 attempts. And you sat there and said nothing." "What was I supposed to say?" "Something," Vivienne said. "You're not a nobody, Callum. Start acting like it." Lenora had stopped. She hadn't meant to, but she had. She stood in the corridor with her empty cart, one hand on the handle, and she listened to the silence that followed Vivienne's words. Callum didn't respond. Lenora moved on. She went to the service corridor, parked the cart, and stood for a moment with her hands flat on the metal shelf. The corridor was fluorescent lit and quiet, except for the hum of an ice machine somewhere down the hall. She stayed there until her hands were steady. "You're not a nobody, Callum. Start acting like it." She had not made her son into someone who needed to assert his importance over a server who had made an honest mistake. She had not raised him to believe that how the staff treated you was a matter of status. And she had watched him sit with that and say nothing, not because he agreed. She didn't think he agreed, but because disagreeing with Vivienne was, apparently, something that took more than he had left. That was the part that broke her heart. She went through her remaining shift with the focused calm she brought to every difficult thing. She helped with the Sunday brunch setup. She folded napkins and restocked the breakfast station and spoke to Ferris about the linen delivery schedule for next week, because it was a real schedule that needed managing and pretending. Otherwise would have made the whole thing a performance. At 2 in the afternoon, when her shift ended, she changed back into her own clothes. She drove 15 minutes to a small cafe in the town. She knew from previous visits, and she sat at a corner table and ordered tea and let herself feel everything she had been holding aside for 3 days. She thought about what she had seen. Not just Sunday morning, all of it. The way Vivienne's eyes moved across a room, calculating. The way she spoke to service staff, not cruelty exactly, but a steady signal of hierarchy, of who mattered and who was present only to serve. The way she'd chosen her words to Callum. Not "you should say something," but "start acting like it," an instruction, a small correction to his identity. Lenora thought about the long years of her own marriage, the early ones, when she was still learning what she wanted and what she would not tolerate. She thought about what it would have done to her, to be slowly, invisibly shaped by someone who thought she needed improvement. She drove back to the lodge at 4. She walked through the front entrance this time. Danica was at the front desk, and when she looked up and recognized Lenora, the Lenora who wasn't in a uniform, who walked with the particular weight of someone who owned the building she was standing in, her expression shifted in a way that was almost comical. "Mrs. Ashby," Danica said. "I didn't know you were. You've been wonderful this weekend," Lenora said. "Genuinely, I mean that." She asked which room Callum was in. She already knew, but she asked properly this time. She knocked on the door of 307. Callum opened it, and his face went through several things at once. "Mom? Hi, sweetheart." He looked at her. He looked at her properly. The way you look at something when your brain is trying to place it in a context that doesn't fit. "What are you doing here? Did you know I was? Have you been here the whole? Can I come in?" Vivienne was in the suite, sitting at the small writing desk near the window with a glass of wine. Sable and Theo had apparently left earlier. When Vivienne saw Lenora, she stood, smoothed her sweater, and smiled in the particular way she smiled at Lenora. Warmly, carefully. "Lenora," she said, "what a surprise." "Yes," Lenora said, "I imagine it is." Callum was still at the door. "Mom, what's going on?" Lenora sat down on the sofa. She waited for Callum to close the door, and then she told them. She told them she owned the lodge. She told them she had been on staff since Friday morning. Housekeeping, breakfast service, room service. Because she had wanted to see something clearly. She said it simply, without drama, the way she described most things. When she finished, there was a silence that had particular texture. Vivienne said, "You were spying on us." "I was watching," Lenora said. "There's a difference." "There really isn't," Vivienne said. Her voice had shifted, the warmth was gone, the careful register had dropped, and what was underneath was cooler and more direct. "You were in our space, without telling us. That's a violation of privacy." "You were in my space," Lenora said. "My property, my staff, Callum." Vivienne turned to him. "Are you hearing this?" Callum was standing near the fireplace. He hadn't sat down. He looked at his mother, then at Vivienne, then at some middle point between them. "What did you see?" he asked. He was asking Lenora. She told him. Not everything. She wasn't trying to build a case. She wasn't listing offenses. She told him about the front desk on Friday. About Pierre and the breakfast on Saturday. About the conversation she had overheard on Sunday. Because she felt it was the one he needed to hear reflected back to him. Not as something he had filed away quietly, but as something someone else had witnessed. "You're not a nobody. Start acting like it." She repeated it gently. She watched Callum's jaw move. "She was upset," he said after a moment. "I know. It's not always like that." "I know you believe that," Lenora said. "I'm not asking you to believe me instead of your own experience. I'm asking you to take what you already know and hold it clearly." Vivienne made a sound, a short exhale that contained a great deal. "This is incredible," she said. "You dressed up as a maid to catch me being rude to a server, and now you're telling my fiancé I'm not good enough for him." "I'm not telling him anything," Lenora said. "I'm telling him what I saw." "It's the same thing." "It isn't," Lenora said, and her voice was still even, still steady, still exactly the voice she had used for 3 days of invisible work. "It would be the same thing if I were asking him to take my word for it. I'm asking him to take his own." She looked at Callum. "You know things," she said. "You've been knowing them. I'm just asking you not to put them somewhere you can't reach." Callum looked at the floor for a long moment. Then he said, "Can we have the room?" Vivienne said his name sharply. "Please," he said. "I need a minute with my mom." Vivienne picked up her jacket from the back of the chair. She was very controlled about it. She walked to the door, and she paused with her hand on the handle. "When I come back," she said to Callum, "I hope we can talk about appropriate boundaries." She didn't look at Lenora. Then she left. The door closed. Callum sat down in the chair across from Lenora and put his head in his hands for a moment, and then lifted it. "She's not always like that," he said again. "I know," Lenora said. "Neither are any of us, but you saw enough." "I saw what I needed to see." He was quiet. Outside the window, the lake was catching the late afternoon light, that same light she had noticed from the dining room, the one that always made her stop. She didn't stop for it right now. She watched her sons. "The thing she said," he said eventually, "about acting like it. Yes, she says things like that. Not all the time. But..." He stopped. "But enough," Lenora said. "I don't know," he said. "I don't know if I keep thinking it's smaller than it is. And then I'm not sure if I'm making it larger." "That uncertainty is worth sitting with," Lenora said. "Not with me, with someone you trust, or on your own. But sit with it." "Did you come here to tell me to leave her?" Lenora thought about this honestly. "I came here to see clearly," she said. "I don't know what I'm telling you to do. I don't think I get to tell you that. But you have an opinion." "I always have an opinion." "Mom, Callum." She met his eyes. "You deserve to be with someone who makes you feel larger, not someone who makes you feel like you need correction. That's my opinion. What you do with it is yours." He looked at her for a long time. "You worked 3 days in your own hotel," he said finally. "Housekeeping, floater, mostly. That's unhinged." "A little," she agreed. The corner of his mouth moved. It wasn't quite a smile. It was the thing just before one. "Does Bev know?" he said. "Bev organized my schedule." He laughed, a short broken sound, the kind of laugh that has some grief in it. He rubbed his face. He leaned forward in the chair with his elbows on his knees and looked at the floor, and she let him look. She didn't rush him. She was very good at not rushing people. When he looked up again, his eyes were red at the edges. I think I've known for a while, he said. I know, she said. I think you have too. Outside, the light was going gold and long across the water, the way October light does in the mountains, when the day has nearly used itself up. Lenora sat with her son in the quiet of the room, and she didn't fill it with anything, because sometimes the only useful thing you can do for someone you love is stay near them while they find their way to what they already know. She stayed.